पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज रोलर कोस्टर के नाम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूं वजाहत सईद खान। Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to you wherever you may be. My name is Wajahat S. Khan. I'm an independent journalist working out of New York City, reporting on Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and the rest of South Asia. It's been a roller coaster week for all sorts of reasons for Pakistan. It started with Field Marshal Asim Munir's lunch last week with President Donald Trump, with his return and nomination of Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, and uske baad madness. Trump, the day after he gets nominated by the government of Pakistan, goes on to bomb Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a friend of Pakistan's, right next door. The Pakistani government is embarrassed for around 24 to 48 hours, but all of a sudden, Trump comes up with a ceasefire. The Pakistanis change their tone, and everything seems to have gone back to normal. But is it? Things are fundamentally changing within South Asia. एक तरफ India जो है वो थोड़ा सा isolated है. 3-4 साल पहले India was the toast of the town in Washington. Now the Indian Prime Minister is actually trying to put his hand up and say, "Oh, I too was invited for lunch, but I didn't accept an invitation." Almost in for the folly of sour grapes against the man of the moment, Field Marshal Asim Munir, a reviled, unpopular, and feared man, but still the most powerful man in Pakistan. Definitely a popular man in Washington. If he's not popular in Pakistan, he's definitely popular in DC. We're going to break all of this down today. आज हमने इसे break down करना है. India की changing dynamics, China का angle, even Bangladesh में क्या हो रहा है, and very importantly, the way the Pakistanis are mixing things up versus the Indians, especially with the 3 or 4 C's that they're using to engage the Americans, including China, crypto, critical minerals, and counter-terrorism. We talk about all of those things this weekend with Michael Kugelman on Mahaz's Weekend Update. हम हफ्ते में कम से कम एक प्रोग्राम अंग्रेजी में इसलिए करते हैं कि wider audiences के लिए जाए. So, share, like, subscribe, comment. Stay with me for a hell of a show. It's a nice, relaxed, long, big picture overview with Mike Kugelman. We have a great back and forth, and we also cite from the famous Foreign Policy magazine. So stay tuned. Okay, so to understand these issues and more, we now pivot to Washington, where my favorite man inside the Beltway, Mike Kugelman, has joined us again for a weekend update, not like Saturday Night Live, rather Saturday morning, not so live. Mike, welcome back to Mahaz. Hope you're well. How are you doing?
Thank you. Good to be back here with you. And if only we could be as funny as the Saturday Night Live folks. You could be, perhaps, but
no, I think we could get there. I think we could make a good team. I think Colin Joust and Michael Che, we could give them a run for their money at some point in the not so near future. But really, let's dig down, Mike. I'm looking at your brief. Fantastic foreign policy briefing, as usual, for South Asia, for the Foreign Policy magazine. This is something which I am really interested in. Pakistan's where does Pakistan stand after the Iran conflict? Now, I like how you really draw this out. There's been a roller coaster week for Pakistan. It starts with Asim Munir having goat cheese gatto, halal goat cheese gatto, I might add, with Donald Trump, and then going back and nominating the man effectively for a Nobel Peace Prize. But then Trump really does what he wasn't supposed to do, or isn't expected to do, didn't say he would do, said he'd think a couple of weeks about it, but goes ahead and bombs Iran anyways. The Pakistani government, the Pakistani military chief, they find themselves in an embarrassing corner. They've just met this guy. They've just had lunch with him. They've just nominated him for the biggest prize on the planet. And now they're in a tough spot. And you say that Munir got played because the New York Times goes on to report that as far back as the Tuesday before that launch, Trump had made up his mind. He's going to bomb Iran. And yet he hosted Munir. He said, "Oh, I'm considering Pakistan's opinion because they know Iran better than most and they're not happy." Why do you think Asim Munir got played? Those are tough words coming from you by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, and there's still some uncertainty in the sense that we still don't know. Obviously, we don't have a transcript of the meeting between Munir and Trump. But my argument, I mean, you've I think nicely laid it out in the sense that in the days leading up to the Trump Munir meeting, the Pakistani government had been saying repeatedly that we need to see de-escalation. Clearly, the Pakistani government did not support the Israeli strikes, and it did not want there to be U.S. strikes. And so I think there's good reason to believe that when the two leaders sat down for their goat cheese laden lunch, that the field marshal might have put that point down that well, look, we want to see this war wrap up. It doesn't serve our interests. And I suspect that the army chief might have even pointed to the convergence in views, or the apparent convergence of views between the two leaders for wanting the war to wind down. Um, and then, as I also say in the brief, the sequencing, the fact that it was the day after the lunch that Trump then said that he's going to wait 2 weeks before he makes a decision about what to do, suggesting that, and this had been gotten some traction in Pakistani media discussions, that Munir had essentially
Yeah.
influenced Trump to hold off and look at the idea of de-escalation. And then, of course, per the reporting that came from U.S. sources, Trump had made up his mind in that sense that Munir could have been putting this idea on the table before Trump that was completely irrelevant because Trump had already made a decision. So if Munir had said, "Well, look, let's focus on the importance of restraint and so on," Trump had already decided to launch strikes the day before, and had apparently told his national security team sometime on Wednesday. It's unclear if it was before the lunch or after. But that's what I mean, that essentially that the army chief might have been taken for a ride. And again, we don't know for sure because the transcript is not available. But I just think it's unlikely. I think it's quite likely that the army chief would have been trying to to emphasize this idea of, well, yes, you and I agree that this war shouldn't have started. Let's see how it can end. Hopefully, it'll come to that. And then things went in a very different direction.
Yeah, but the army's done a pretty good job on capitalizing on its new high, hasn't it? Like for the past couple of months since the face-off with the Indians, the army chief's stock just keeps on getting higher. He keeps on getting more and more attention, and I'm quite impressed, actually. I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from a lot of viewers for this, but I'm quite impressed by the multi-dimensional chess that he's playing. As you said a couple of weeks ago, the CCCC bits, which are coming in vis-a-vis the relationship with the U.S. He's talking counterterrorism. At the same time, he's talking critical minerals. At the same time, he's pushing for crypto diplomacy. And obviously China. And now he's even pushing the peace prize on Trump. And I guess another C is the cheese. He gets away with goat cheese gâteau again at the White House, and not in the Roosevelt room, but in the cabinet room right next door. How has this man gotten so important from not being too far off from pariah status 4 months ago, Mike? We were on a show earlier in the spring talking about the Pakistan Democracy Act, which was the first act of its kind, the first bill of its kind tabled to actually target, name, and sanction, proposally, a sitting army chief. That wasn't like last year even. That was a couple of months ago. How has this man, Asim Munir, really changed gears and perceptions so quickly in Washington?
Well, I'm not sure if the perceptions have really changed that much in Washington. I mean, I think it's more what's happened at home in Pakistan. And I think that officials here, I mean, going back to the Biden administration, had not engaged with him. But I think that there was a view that, he was an important and an impactful leader and someone certainly that one needs to work with. And so I think there's been a consistency in views there, and that's not unusual if we look at the history of U.S.-Pakistan relations. As you and I both know, and as you and I have discussed, that at times U.S. officials have privileged their relations with the generals instead of the civilians in Pakistani governments. So I don't think that was really the change, though. Of course, it is significant that suddenly you have Trump whining or not whining, but dining the Pakistani army chief. The first time that you've ever had a case of a U.S. president hosting a Pakistani army chief at the White House when he's not also holding power as head of state. That's significant, and that gets to other issues that we discussed last week that I think reflect how unconventional and unusual the Trump administration's approach is to foreign policy. Very personality driven, very focused on transactionalism in its essence, in terms of, what can this foreign leader do for me? How can they help U.S. interests? How can they provide business opportunities for the United States? And that, I think, all came together to, in this case, because, as we've discussed before, Pakistan has very successfully gotten the attention of this administration and this president through, dangling the possibility of crypto cooperation, critical minerals cooperation. And the army chief, because of his portfolio is so large, he is very engaged on matters related to that.
You also said, Mike, in your briefing, you also mentioned that Trump may be doing this to put India on the back foot. Now, keep in mind that Trump is pretty good at those three-way negotiations, which seem to be happening at this time as well. He's not once, but 16 times now come and said that he's been behind the ceasefire on the 10th of May. He's also at least a dozen times said there was the carrot and stick of the trade policies with both India and Pakistan that led to the ceasefire being brokered. He's been pretty clear about it. The Indians have completely rejected it. But I mean, Trump's voice and volume are higher. So that's the word on the street. But how much is Trump now trying to play India versus Pakistan in all of this? Clearly, the Indian press is miffed at him. The Indian strategic community is miffed at him. Even the Indian prime minister's issued a statement, a very clear one, that Trump called me, told me this, I told him this back. He's wrong about the ceasefire and so many other details. Where do you think this is going with India and Pakistan as far as Trump is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I'd said in the brief that Pakistan might have used the Nobel Prize decision as an effort to try to counter India, just because the idea, if you're actually nominating someone for a Nobel Peace Prize based on, or they want to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize based on his role in the ceasefire, that suggests that you're trying to legitimize that idea, that notion that Trump really did play a critical role in the ceasefire. And of course, India has repeatedly rejected that. And Prime Minister Modi himself, in his call with Trump soon after the G7, which Trump left too early to be able to meet with Modi in person. So this is very clear that India takes a very different position on the idea of Trump playing a role in the ceasefire, or the U.S. government at all playing a role in the ceasefire. So I think that's where the India element comes in there. But yeah, this is something that's been getting a lot of discussion and I think a lot of confusion in New Delhi in recent weeks. Why this is not simply a one-off situation where President Trump announces his role in the ceasefire, leaves it at that. Indeed, as you said, we're talking about 15, 16 times. Whether he has been advised by aides or those that he trusts to try to keep these messages out there, to try to ensure that there will continue to be opportunities for engagement with Pakistan in ways that could help advance business opportunities, whether that's something at play, I don't know. I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist, but that's one thing to put out there. But also, I think this could come to issues that just get back to Trump and his being unconventional, in the sense that he pursues foreign policy and diplomacy without regard for nuance and policy precedents and all of that. Trump, I think he genuinely likes India. He supports the idea of partnership with it. That's very clear to me. And so I think that, here you have that run into this idea of how he projects himself as the ultimate peace broker, as the ultimate game changer and deal maker. And, he, I think, wants to be at the center of this intrigue. I think he's very intrigued by Kashmir and how intractable it is. And he genuinely thinks that he could actually make things better for both countries if he helps resolve this, not recognizing or not caring that this could upset India. And same with the ceasefire boast, that he likes to be associated with deals. Yeah. And that was a pretty big deal that got the ceasefire. as
Yeah.
I think we discussed before, I think that he has overstated his role in it. But his personal goals, I think, here might be conflicting with conventional understandings of how U.S. diplomacy and foreign policy should be pursued.
I like the psychoanalysis, especially about the whole. He is intrigued with Kashmir. He's mentioned it a couple of times, sometimes factually incorrect, but that's expected. But the way he says, "Oh, they've been fighting for 1,000 years, those two." But I like how he contextualizes Kashmir in his own head. He thinks he can solve it. You can see that from his statements. But Mike, there's also something else which we must consider. The whole diplomacy bits. The Pakistanis seem to be getting their diplomacy in order. They've taken advantage of India's the slippery slope India's found itself in, whether vis-a-vis Canada and the Sikh killing over there, or even the case that is being investigated for an attempted killing here in New York, or as we've talked about this a couple of times, the shine that India has enjoyed in the Western Hemisphere, in the G7 countries, has sort of worn off over the last couple of years because of what it's been trying to do with vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis Canada, etc. Now, this is not a show dedicated to India's foreign policy. Rather, we're taking a holistic view of South Asia. In your foreign policy brief, you mentioned this rather interesting article in the print by Ajay Malareddy, who effectively says that Pakistan has outmaneuvered India in crypto. And you mentioned he mentions India's foreign minister, Mr. India First, Mr. S. Jaishankar, whose critics now say that India First actually means India alone. Now, we saw this in Operation Sindoor, where India was relatively isolated instead of Pakistan. And we're seeing this in crypto diplomacy, where Pakistan's the toast of the town. Angry Indian anchors are saying, oh, the Trump family is making crypto deals with Pakistan. Well, they may have a point. They probably are. So tell us how and why you cited this particular article about how the Pakistanis are outmaneuvering the Indians in crypto. Why crypto? Why is it so important?
I mean, I think that this comes back to how effective Pakistan has been at getting the administration's attention. And I think here India has been caught on the back foot because it overestimated its ability to understand and anticipate Trump and what he might do. So, we know that I think we discussed this last week, that Pakistan has very wisely capitalized on personal and family links that Trump has. They know how important that is to him. And they know that his sons are on this crypto, they're part of this crypto company. And they've engaged with Pakistan's crypto council, and that obviously that only could have happened if you had key stakeholders in Pakistan that wanted to push forward on that. So I think that's very important. I think that the Indians had, they knew, again, we discussed this previously, I think, that, the senior officials in the government in India are the same senior officials in the Indian government in Modi's second term, the previous term. And that overlapped with some of Trump 1. And so I think they thought they understood him, based on that. They'd engage with him. And the Indians went out of their way to make all types of concessions during the first few weeks of the second Trump administration by saying they were going to reduce tariffs, by saying that they were going to import American goods, even though they'd already been importing more and more American goods in recent years, including more and more American oil. But despite all that, they clearly didn't do what Pakistan did. They didn't go to the heart of the matter, and that is to tap into these personal relationships and family relationships that Trump has, and hone in on that in a very transactional way. Pakistan has succeeded, and so I think that's where the crypto element comes, and it comes in on the critical mineral side too. I mean, the fact that Pakistan hosted this really large, really big mineral investment forum in Islamabad. It had a lot of heavy hitters from the tech, from a variety of industries. You had a senior U.S. official there, not a really top official, but the top bureau official at the South Asia branch of the State Department. He was there. So I think that Pakistan has really been able to roll out the red carpet. You could call it a charm offensive, and this is very advantageous. But I do think that we might see a reversion to the norm because I said this previously. I think that for all we talk about how all these C's, crypto, critical minerals, et cetera, others are now driving this sudden momentum in US-Pakistan relations, I don't really see how far you can go with those areas on a very practical level, because crypto, as I understand it, it's still a major work in progress in Pakistan, right? I mean, until very recently, Pakistan had not legalized crypto, and now it's taking steps to
Sure, but
legalize
now it's
cryptocurrency.
but the bottom line is that Pakistan's really owning crypto, and the Indians are really not owning crypto,
Yeah.
officially speaking, and that is affecting both Delhi and Islamabad's, rather Rawalpindi's ties with the White House. But moving on, Mike, critically, and this is pretty big. The Indian defense minister was in China at the SEO. There was a little bit of drama with Pahalgam not being included in the SEO joint statement, which he refused to sign. But then he did say something interesting to his counterpart. He said, Rajnath Singh said that he wants a permanent solution to the problems with China, the border problems with China. Now that's a great approach. I'm from South Asia. Everybody should be friends. Kumbaya, all of that. Happy that the Indians and Chinese are talking. But it's really interesting that the Indians are adopting a talk technique with the Chinese while they're doing a fight version of the same with Pakistan. Why are the Indians not willing to talk to Pakistan while they're happy to talk to the Chinese when, frankly, we know that the Pakistani and Chinese are pretty tight and will remain so, probably against India's favor for a bit?
Yeah, it's an important question, especially since for the first time in this recent conflict, Pakistan was using Chinese weaponry against India, not just jets, but also radar systems, air defense, and so on. So there's several factors at play. One is that, the India-China relationship, as fraught as it has been forevermore, it's not a hostile relationship in the way that the India-Pakistan relationship is. You have open channels for dialogue between India and China, particularly, on both civilian and military levels. And as you know, it was after the Ladakh clash in 2020 when relations really fell down, really plunged in a big way. But despite all that, there had been high-level military dialogue, I believe once a month, engagement between senior military officials to try to ease tensions. Ease the tensions that came out of the Ladakh clash. So there's always been engagement, and I'd also argue that the India-China relationship has not let the tensions in the relationship hijack the rest of the relationship. So trade between India and China has always been robust and has continued to be robust even in the last few years. So I think one answer to your question is there's just more space. There's more diplomatic space in the India-China relationship than there is in India-Pakistan. And that space, I think, makes it easier to justify politically engagements between India and China. And it's true that right after the Ladakh clash, there was a lot of tough talk coming from New Delhi, and there were some punitive steps that were taken, like banning all of these Chinese-made apps and all of that. But they continued to engage. Another factor is, obviously the power dynamics are so different between China and India, and India and Pakistan, right? I mean, India recognizes that China is a larger, more powerful player. It's not going to acknowledge that publicly, but it's obviously the opposite with India and Pakistan. So I think that India feels that it can, it can comfortably take a confrontational position toward Pakistan and not have to face risks. Whereas if it were to take a continuously confrontational position toward China and not willing to talk, well, there's no saying what China could do on the border with its provocations. It has the capacity to threaten India, and India is still looking for ways to deter that. Final point I'll make on this: politics, right? I mean, it's very clear that the Modi government has concluded that politically it benefits to take the hardest possible line on Pakistan, and that if you start talking about olive branches and dialogue and all that, you could run into trouble. And especially since that memorable trip that Modi made to Lahore, early in his first term on Christmas Day, was it 2015, I think,
Yep.
to meet Nawaz Sharif, to wish him happy birthday. There was a terrorist attack just a few days later in India, which India blamed on Pakistani militants. And I think that for the Indians, that basically meant we can't engage anymore. We can't do this anymore. We're going to take a confrontational approach.
But moving back to the India-China, rather the China-South Asia dynamic, another great story. I didn't even think such a expo or such a summit existed, but there's a China-South Asia summit which has been going on, and it's been going on for a few years. You mention it, and you also mention an interesting new alliance that is popping up: China, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. these three together are meeting as well, not for the first time. And this has been a part of China's larger plans for Asia through the Belt and Road Initiative. Tell us more about this, because this has really caught on a different dimension. China is, in a way, flanking India, with Pakistan on its east, Pakistan on its west, Bangladesh to its east, with the BRI, meeting diplomats from Dhaka and Islamabad, who, by the way, are now in a much closer position with each other. China's job just got easier because Bangladesh and Pakistan actually like each other for a change after a long time, after Sheikh Hasina's ouster. This is an interesting new alliance you also mentioned. I didn't even know this forum existed. What do these guys do? What are their plans? Is this like a anti-India alliance or a BRI only, business only alliance? What are the Chinese thinking with this South Asia China Expo Summit, whatever this is?
Yeah, so I mean, first off, this meeting that happened, this China, Pakistan, Bangladesh meeting, I think is a great example to back up your point that you made earlier about how Pakistan is holding its own with its diplomacy amid all of this volatility. It's clearly solidified its closest alliances with Saudi Arabia and China. Its relationship with the U.S. is in a good place. Its relationship with the EU is very good. And now it's taking advantage of these pretty significant geopolitical shifts in South Asia over the last year, which includes a new possibility to work closely with Bangladesh in the context of or against the backdrop of its alliance with China. This all benefits Pakistan. This is all very concerning to India. And I think Islamabad and Rawalpindi deserve credit for that. So in terms of this meeting, I don't think, and in the South Asia brief, I think I sort of put out a caveat that we shouldn't necessarily overstate the importance of it. It is important because it's been a long time since you had a high-level meeting like this involving diplomats from these three countries, because Bangladesh had to be careful what it did along these lines with who it engaged with, given that it had this very special, deep relationship with India. This was during the Sheikh Hasina era. And so, Bangladesh, it did have a good relationship with China in the Hasina era. In fact, those relations actually grew, particularly on the commercial side. BRI was brought to Bangladesh, and then you actually, Bangladesh has been a key arms purchaser from China for quite some years as well. I think that Bangladesh is one of Bangladesh's top is one of China's top arms suppliers. In fact, I think it's number 2 after Pakistan and has been for a while. So there was that. But the difference is that during the Hasina era, I think there were some red lines, unstated for sure, but red lines from India directed at Bangladesh about things that it couldn't do. And that would include any steps that could undercut India's security interests. So Bangladesh did hold off. And so that's why things are a bit different now in the Yunus era, that Bangladesh feels perfectly comfortable having a meeting like this. But it's interesting that the reaction has been very different from the three countries. Pakistan and China have described it as not an alliance, but a trilateral mechanism, and they've talked about the need to make it a regular meeting, a trilateral. They've talked about forming joint working groups, a trilateral joint working group. Yep. Bangladesh's government has only described it as an informal arrangement, which I think suggests a level of hesitation that you don't get with the other two, which is interesting.
Yeah, not ready to jump into a threesome yet. Mike, real quickly, I have to take you to this guy.
Done.
Now, before we jump into it, this, for everybody's information, is the world-famous Steve Bannon. He's the godfather of the MAGA movement. He's a former White House aide. He's a former Trump confidant. He's the voice of the Make America Great Again base. He is he's resonant. He's loud and he's proud, and he reflects a part of American values, culture, politics, and the system, which has brought Trump to power. And he says something very interesting, Mike. And I need you to weigh in on this from a Washingtonian perspective, because even though the Iran-Israel war is mostly behind us, and the talks hopefully will continue between the U.S. and Iran again, Bannon says something else. In the post-Iran world, he says, Pakistan is next. Now, the source he's citing about Pakistan's missile plans, I'm not 100% on, but I am very convinced that he does have a very loud political voice, and I want to know where he's going with it. Let's watch.
Breaking news. U.S. intelligence believes Pakistan is developing a nuclear-armed ICBM capable of reaching the United States. This is Pakistan that President Trump just had this chief of staff of the army and nominated President Trump for the Nobel Prize, right? Officially nominated for the Nobel Prize. Here's my point. Pakistan has had, 181 nuclear weapons. He had Dr. Khan, who and actually spread it, I think, to North Korea. And these guys, and people said this is how people in the Middle East have gotten nuclear weapons, etc. That's not the point of this. The point of this is another MacGuffin. And I'm not saying they can't develop ICBMs. Why does it come? Why is it released on the very day Trump said, hey, the war is over and we're not going to fight a war in Iran. We're done. We're done. This is the deep state. This is the arms manufacturers. This is the madness that drives this town. And if we don't break it, and we don't break it now, it's never going to stop. And it shouldn't be lost on you. Netanyahu has always said, and we'll pull up the clips this afternoon, after Iran, Pakistan is going to be a problem. Pakistan is going to be a problem.
Wow. Okay. So, Mike, what's your take, man? The base is worried that Pakistan is next after Iran in this Israeli worldview, which Trump seems to be backing. So, you heard the man. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of selective quoting there on his part. I mean, he was citing an outlet that I frankly had never heard of called Global Eye News or something like that. But in fact, what he said was true in the sense, or I shouldn't. What it does reflect something very credible in that there's a foreign affairs article, an article in the new print version of Foreign Affairs, the new issue, written by two former senior U.S. officials, in which they were talking broadly speaking about nuclear challenges for the U.S. And in the article, the two writers bring attention to this, this claim that U.S. intelligence officials believe that Pakistan is developing an ICBM that could reach the U.S. So, what Bannon was saying, it was based on something that has been made by credible experts. But, this is an article in Foreign Affairs, and it's in the new print edition. But given that we're talking about the print edition, the article must have been written a number of weeks ago, and the idea must have, come out some weeks ago. So to link this idea of U.S. intelligence officials worrying about what Pakistan is doing, linking that to what just happened with the war in Iran would not make sense, in my view, just because this is something that has been out there. And this goes back even further. I mean, you'll remember during the end of the Biden administration, the U.S. Announced a round of sanctions against Pakistan, and you had a senior U.S. official, a senior official at the NSC. And again, this is the very end of the Biden administration. John Feiner was his name, bringing attention publicly to concerns about Pakistan's ballistic missiles program, which is very unusual for a U.S. official to do.
Yeah, that was
so these concerns.
That was one of the last briefings from the Biden administration we saw in Pakistan, and came out of the blue. I remember it came out of left field about U.S. administration's concerns about Pakistan. In fact, it was compounded by a couple of quick sanctions of Pakistani companies and Chinese companies who are dealing in nuclear components or materials. You remember that? It sort of happened in a volley, and then it stopped. So
yeah, exactly. Right. I remember it. But I think the sequencing is important here. And don't think that what Bannon is saying is true in the sense that we're hearing these reports of U.S. intelligence concerns right now suggesting that Pakistan could be next. Not at all true, particularly among many other reasons, given the fondness that President Trump appears to have for Pakistan's army chief and for the relationship with Pakistan. I mean, I'd suggest that your listeners and your audience take a look at the article in Foreign Affairs. It's called "National Security in a World of Proliferating Risks and Eroding Constraints." It's in the current print issue, Vipin Narang and Pranay Vadai. It's very interesting because it gets into their thinking about why the U.S. might be concerned about Pakistani ballistic missile that, Pakistan, of course, has repeatedly said there's no intention of targeting the U.S. It's all about India. There's some interesting analysis in that piece.
But Bannon also says something interesting about Bibi Netanyahu and his claims earlier, his ideas, which he doesn't cite, but he doesn't show, but he does cite that Pakistan's next in the Israeli worldview. We've seen clips of those clips float around on Twitter, etc. What's your take on Israel vis-a-vis Pakistan, real quickly?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's been some selective clips that are old of Netanyahu talking about Pakistan, but it's in the context of other things, expressing concerns about Islamist extremism and terrorism there and so on. And I think he also talked about how that's happening against the backdrop of Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. No, look, it's what the relationship with Pakistan and Israel is one of the most fascinating things out there. There's, of course, no formal relationship, but there's a history of informal links between the two sides. It's very interesting. Pakistan has no intention of ever recognizing the Israeli state, in my view, until there's a Palestinian state. I think that's true. But there have been some very interesting informal tie-ups, and that includes, perhaps most prominently, when Musharraf, during the Musharraf era, you had an encounter in Turkey, right? You may remember this, between a senior Indian and Pakistani diplomat. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, exactly. Anyway, so I don't see how, I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk as to whether if there's ever sustained stability and no more wars in the Middle East, that the Saudis might be ready to sign on to the Abraham Accords, and if they do, they would probably pressure Pakistan to do the same, which I can't imagine Pakistan wanting to do. But for now, I think it's very clear that during the recent war, Pakistan and Iran, Pakistan, through its full support to Iran, its full diplomatic support, its full moral support to Iran. That's very clear.
All right, and last question, man. He's my least favorite in the Pakistani cabinet, but an important man nonetheless. Khwaja Asif defends the hybrid system. Now, I know you've written about the hybrid system a few times as well, Mike, but I really need you to weigh in on this. This is critical for those trying to understand the new way the Pakistani machine works, the state machinery works.
The popularity of the army has really increased. So, I mean, as a Democrat, as somebody who's seen multiple military coups, who understands the downside of too much military power in a country like Pakistan, does this worry you at all?
No, it doesn't worry me. And I tell you why. This is a hybrid model. It's not an ID democratic government, it's a hybrid. In the past, when the establishment used to operate from behind the scene, and they definitely wielded a lot of power over the decade. So this arrangement, the hybrid arrangement, I think is doing wonders, And I personally think that if this sort of model was adopted way back in the 90s, the things, could have been much, much better.
Mike, I'm a little shocked. I don't know what's going on here, but you got this guy back in the day, Khwaja Asif, and I don't want to make this about Khwaja Asif. I want to make it about the larger Pakistani political dispensation, which is in power right now. He was one of the loudest voices against Musharraf in the 90s and the 2000s, suffered jail because of a military dictatorship then. What's going on with the modern -1 Imran Khan political dispensation as we know it? You must weigh in on this. We talk about the army so much, but we really don't talk about the civilians much. Why is serving elected, and I use that with a lot of irony, defense minister defending the military and its overreach over civilian institutions?
Yeah, I mean, you know well that one of the evergreen fundamental realities of politics in Pakistan is that if you are a civilian political figure and you want to have success and you want to have power, you need to be in the good graces of the military. And, we know this has been the pattern forevermore, and that includes Imran Khan when in terms of his own ascent to power to become the prime minister. I think that in this particular case, what's significant is not necessarily what he said, what Asa said, but the fact that he said it publicly. I think that if you look at the Khan era, the first few years before things went downhill, there was a tacit acceptance on the part of Khan and his government of a hybrid regime. But in this case, there's an open embrace of it. And, I think that's a reflection of this current civilian leadership. The prime minister, I would argue, and I wrote about this some years ago, right before Khan was elected in an election that was also contestable because of military involvement, 2018.
Yeah.
That Shehbaz Sharif is really the favorite son of the military. I think more than any other top Pakistani civilian official in the current day. And I think that he is very comfortable with this, with an open, partnership between the civilians and the military, and is very happy to defer on a number of levels. And I think that Shehbaz Sharif wants to be that first civilian prime minister to serve out a full term. And obviously you have a better chance of doing that if you have your defense minister making comments like this. But this is just, I think it's a reflection of the current moment. And this also gets back to an point you made earlier about how the army chief, the field marshal, is in a very good place right now, despite all the challenges that he faces with the terrorism upsurge and the significant levels of anger at the army. You have a civilian dispensation that is fully committed to working with and deferring to the military and acknowledging that willingness, embracing that openly. And that's, I think, very different from what we've seen in the past. But final point I'll make on this, has there ever been a time when Pakistan has not had formal military rule when there has not been a hybrid regime? I don't think so.
Yep.
And, when it doesn't work out, then things happen, as what happened with Khan when he fell out of, this is the history we've seen throughout Pakistani politics. And I think this current civilian dispensation doesn't want that pattern to play out. It wants to continue to serve a full term, even if it means having to set aside even more power than is typical to be set aside in a civilian administration.
I've long called him the Minister of Self-Defense, and I think you have proven my point with that brilliant take. Michael Kugelman from Washington, columnist for Foreign Policy Magazine. You run an excellent briefing every week for Foreign Policy Magazine. Mike's briefing is linked. Mike's Twitter is linked in the description. He's at Michael Kugelman on X, and he's our man for our weekend update. Thanks for joining us for another one this weekend, Mike. Hope to talk to you next time. And again, for those of us who are not used to the Foreign Policy Briefing, remind us, when does it come out? When can we catch it? How do we subscribe? How does it work?
It comes out every Wednesday night, Eastern time in the US. If you go to foreignpolicy.com and just look for the newsletter section, you could sign up for it there.
All right. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon, brother. You take care.
Thank you. You too.
All right. That was Mike Kugelman. I am Wajahat Saeed Khan. Share, like, subscribe, comment, support independent journalism, support people like Mike and myself. Subscribe to his Twitter, subscribe to his Foreign Policy newsletter, subscribe to my Substack at wajashkhan.substack.com. I write a daily newsletter. It's called the Park Stack, 5 minutes for processing 5 important ideas out of South Asia. The link is in the description. Again, share, like, subscribe, comment, support independent journalism, be independent. I'll talk to you very soon. Pakistan, Zindabad.